Before we step into the dark again, subscribe to the Dread Diaries. If you don't, the forest might remember your name next. The first thing they noticed was the silence, an unnatural, suffocating quiet that pressed against the skull like pressure from deep underwater. Even the wind refused to breathe. Detective Ryo Nakamura stepped past the yellow tape and into the narrow trail leading into Aokigahara, a place the locals called Jukai, the Sea of Trees. But to investigators, it was known for something else, a forest that swallowed sound and people. Ryo had responded to missing person cases across Japan for 15 years, but Aokigahara was the one place every officer dreaded. Because here, most searches didn't end with rescue. They ended with recovery. He moved deeper, the forest canopy thick enough to blot out the sky. Moss climbed the bases of twisted trees. The roots knuckled across the ground, ready to trip anyone who rushed. Ryo scanned the earth carefully. The call had come from a hiker who claimed they heard shouting, panicked, desperate, then nothing. When the hiker tried to call out, they said their voice felt absorbed by the forest. Most officers shrugged it off as nerves. But Ryo had felt it too, years earlier, during his first search here. Sound died in this place. Hope died in this place. 30 minutes in, he found the campsite. A small blue tent slumped against the roots of an ancient cedar. A backpack lay beside it, half unzipped, as if someone abandoned it mid-action. The air was still warm from the morning sun, yet the tent felt unnervingly cold when Ryo brushed his hand against it. Inside, he found a notebook. He'd seen hundreds like it. Aokigahara was filled with letters, journals, belongings left behind by people in crisis. Police treated them with care, documenting everything with respect. But this notebook was different. The last entry was recent. Maybe only hours old. If anyone finds this, I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am. But something is wrong with the forest. I hear footsteps that aren't mine. I feel watched. And my compass. Ryo swallowed. He lifted the compass found beside the notebook. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. Is broken. Ryo stepped back outside, letting the cold air clear his thoughts. The compass malfunction was not unusual. Aokigahara sat on volcanic rock rich in iron deposits, but the journal's phrasing bothered him. Footsteps? Being watched? He followed the faint tracks leading away from the camp. The footprints were shallow, directionless, circling trees, looping back, then veering sharply into the underbrush. No sense of purpose. No final destination. Almost like the missing person had been wandering in confusion. Or fleeing something. Ryo advanced carefully, ducking under branches, listening for anything out of place. But the forest held its breath. Even the distant hum of insects vanished. When he reached a narrow ravine, he paused. Something metallic caught the light. A camcorder. It sat half buried in leaves, lens cracked but intact enough to recognize. Ryo checked the side. The battery was dead, but the red indicator told him it had been recording. He bagged it gently. Evidence like this was rare. Most electronics lost power long before police recovered them. He continued along the ravine until he found something else. Torn cloth caught on a broken branch, dark blue fabric. The same color as the jacket described in the missing person report. A middle-aged office worker from Tokyo. No history of mental health conditions. No behavior suggesting he would intentionally come here. His co-workers said he'd simply left early from work 2 days ago. No explanation. Ryo pocketed the cloth and pressed deeper into the ravine. The ground softened underfoot, damp and uneven. He could smell the faint odor of decaying vegetation, sweet, earthy, almost syrup-like. Trees leaned unnaturally, their trunks twisted like frozen serpents. The deeper he walked, the more he felt the pressure build in his ears. Then he froze. The trees ahead were marked with bright red tape, search and rescue markers. But these were old, frayed, faded. A search route from years ago. Ryo's pulse quickened. Why would he end up here? He muttered under his breath. This area was far beyond where most lost hikers reached. You'd have to deliberately push into the older, more dangerous parts of the forest to find it. He stepped forward and heard it. A single crack of branches behind him. Not the wind. Not an animal. Too heavy. Too deliberate. Rio turned sharply, flashlight raised. Nothing. Just the silent wall of trees, staring. He waited, breath held, heart pounding. Then he slowly backed toward the ravine wall, keeping his eyes on the darkened tree-line. He'd been in dozens of tense investigations, but this was different. His instincts weren't telling him danger. They were telling him someone was here, watching. He reached for his radio. Control, this is Detective Nakamura. I'm deep inside zone. Static. Not unusual in Aokigahara, but it still tightened the fear in his gut. He tried again. Nothing. He lowered the radio. The silence returned like a smothering blanket. Rio turned toward the old search markers, scanning the ground for fresher prints. After several agonizing minutes, he found something, disturbed soil, fresh enough to still be soft. A heel impression. A partial toe mark. Someone had stood here recently. He followed them, heart pounding, jaw clenched, until he reached what looked like a natural sinkhole. A shallow depression, barely big enough for a person to lie in. The footprints circled it repeatedly. Whoever came here had paced nervously, maybe unsure whether to climb inside. Rio approached the edge, crouched, and shined his light downward. The beam illuminated something pale. Fabric. A sleeve. His stomach dropped. He lowered himself carefully and brushed back the leaves covering the figure. It was the missing man. Face calm, eyes closed, body untouched. No trauma, no struggle. As if he had simply lain down and let the forest take him. But something else made Rio's blood run cold. Beside the body, half buried in the soil, was another notebook. Older. Weathered. He opened it gently. The handwriting was different. A different name on the inside cover. Someone who had disappeared years ago. But the last line written inside, the final message of a person never found, matched the new notebook word for word. If anyone finds this, I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am. Rio stared, frozen, breath shaking. Both men wrote the same sentence. Years apart. But when he turned to read the next line, he realized something else, something impossible. Because the missing man's journal continued, but this older one ended early. On the next line, scorched into the page, were 3 claw-like gouges dragging downward, as if someone or something had torn the writing short. But these weren't animal marks. They were human fingernail marks, worn into the paper by force. Rio's flashlight flickered. And behind him, something moved quietly in the trees. Rio didn't turn around immediately. Years of training anchored him in place, his breath quiet, his pulse hammering but measured. Whatever shifted behind him didn't rush, didn't stalk, didn't breathe heavily. It simply shifted, like weight redistributing on soil. Purposeful. Patient. He finally rotated, slow and controlled, flashlight held steady. Only trees. Their trunks warped by centuries of wind, their shadows long and unnatural under the dim light. But Rio knew what he'd heard. He stepped away from the sinkhole, careful not to disturb the body, and scanned the tangled roots and dense brush. The silence thickened. Even his own heartbeat felt too loud, like it might alert whatever else shared the forest with him. He keyed his radio again. Control, this is Nakamura. I have located. Static. A harsh, tearing hiss that felt almost alive. The same iron-rich rock that messed with compasses also swallowed radio frequencies, but this was different. The static was distorted, as if something was interfering intentionally. Rio clicked the device off and clipped it back on. He checked the older notebook once more. The fingernail gouges bothered him more than the corpse itself. They weren't panicked scrapes. They were deliberate, dragged through the paper with enough force to tear fibers clean apart. Like the writer had tried to erase something, or stop themselves from writing it. Rio placed both journals into separate evidence bags, then slid them into his pack. The forest pressed in around him, the canopy dimming further as clouds gathered overhead. A faint drizzle began falling, tapping softly against the leaves. He knew he had to leave soon. Weather made Aokigahara even more disorienting. But as he retraced the footprints around the sinkhole, he noticed something he'd missed earlier. A third set of prints. Fainter. Older. But human. They didn't belong to the missing man. The shoe pattern was different, narrower, more worn. The spacing between steps suggested hesitation or exhaustion. They led away from the depression, deeper into the part of the forest search teams avoided due to unstable ground and unexplored caverns. Rio swallowed hard. 3 journals. 3 sets of prints. 3 disappearances that somehow overlapped, years apart, converging at this exact point in the forest. Nothing about it made sense. He followed the third trail cautiously, marking trees with bright tape, something he realized the previous missing hikers hadn't done. Why hadn't they tried to leave marks? Why wander deeper instead of out? The trail dipped downward into a shallow ravine, slick with mud. Rio steadied himself against a root and proceeded slowly. As the forest darkened, an oppressive weight settled on his shoulders. The air felt thick, damp, cold enough to raise goosebumps along his arms. He didn't hear the noise until his boots splashed into a shallow puddle. A voice. Faint. Barely audible. A trembling whisper. Don't follow. Rio froze, muscles locking tight. He flashed the light around. No movement, no silhouette, no signs of another living person. He waited. Nothing. His brain fired through possibilities. Echoes? Stress? Auditory hallucinations caused by environmental pressure? The forest was infamous for disorienting even seasoned hikers. But that voice, he recognized the tone. Fear, threaded with resignation. He shook it off, forcing himself forward. The prints grew more erratic, weaving between roots, circling trees, doubling back. It was like watching the trail of a person whose mind was unraveling step by step. Then he found the rope. A length of faded fraying cord tied around a massive cedar trunk, disappearing into the underbrush. Old search training kicked in. People exploring Aokigahara often tied ropes to avoid getting lost. But this rope was cut. Not snapped by force. Not decayed. Cut clean. Rio knelt and examined the end. Smooth. Sharp tool. A knife, most likely. But why would someone sever their only lifeline in the middle of this forest? Thunder rumbled overhead. He stood, following the severed rope deeper until he reached a clearing, and stopped dead. The rope was tied to dozens of trees. Different ropes. Different colors. Different ages. All cut. The forest floor was a graveyard of failed escape routes. Rio felt a chill creep through him, deeper than the cold rain beginning to fall. He did a slow 360-degree turn, flashlight trembling slightly now. He'd never seen this area before. The ropes were arranged haphazardly, intersecting, overlapping, ending abruptly. It looked less like a guide system and more like a map of panic. One rope, bright yellow, newer than the rest, caught his attention. It led toward a large limestone formation, an opening in the earth, partially concealed by moss and vines. A cave. Aokigahara's caves were notorious. Sudden drops. Sharp rocks. Extreme darkness. Every year, hikers went missing in them. Rio approached the mouth cautiously. A gust of freezing air rolled out, unnaturally cold for such a shallow cavity. A metallic clatter echoed from inside, bouncing off stone walls. Rio gripped his flashlight tighter. Another noise followed. A breath. Human. Shaking. Uneven. He stepped to the entrance and angled his light downward. About 15 feet inside, a backpack lay open. Water bottles, scattered maps, a phone with a shattered screen. The yellow rope tied to the tree outside ran along the cave floor before stopping abruptly, cleanly cut again. Rio called out softly. Police. If someone is in here, stay where you are. I'm coming down. His voice didn't echo. The cave swallowed the sound whole. As he descended carefully, boot by boot, the air grew colder. His breath fogged. The beam of his flashlight flickered, just once, but enough to shoot adrenaline through his veins. At the base of the slope, he found something scratched into the rock wall. At first glance, it looked like random marks. But then he traced the pattern. Japanese characters. Repeated again and again, thousands of desperate strokes. I am not alone. Rio stepped back, heart stuttering. The missing office worker couldn't have carved these. They were too old, smoothed by time. Whoever wrote them had been here long before. He turned to leave. Something shifted deeper in the cave. A silhouette. Human height. Standing completely still. Police. Rio shouted, voice cracking with tension. Don't move. The silhouette didn't respond. Didn't flee. Didn't breathe. Rio raised the flashlight. The silhouette vanished. Not ran. Not ducked. Vanished. He gasped, stumbling backward, slipping on the wet stone. The flashlight clattered across the cave floor, skittering to a stop. In the brief moment the light spun, its beam illuminated something on the wall he hadn't noticed before. More carvings. Fresh ones. Clawing marks smeared through wet limestone. But these weren't words. They were fingernail marks. Just like the notebook. And beneath them was a phrase, scratched deep and violently. Turn around. Rio froze. The cave air tightened. The silence grew heavier, crushing. He slowly turned, every instinct screaming. And what he saw in the beam of the weak, flickering light did not make sense. Rio's flashlight steadied just long enough to reveal a man standing in the cave, a thin, dirt-smeared figure with shaking hands and hollow, sleepless eyes. Rain dripped from his hair. His lips trembled as he lifted one finger to his mouth. A warning. A plea. Don't let it hear you. Before Rio could speak, the stranger's expression twisted into terror. His eyes shot past Rio's shoulder. He stumbled backward, scraped against stone, and darted into a narrow crevice. The space looked far too tight for any normal person, yet he forced himself through with frantic, jerking movements. His final words echoed down the stone tunnel. You don't understand. It follows the ones who look for answers. Then he vanished. Rio tried to steady himself, but the silence in the cave felt charged, alive. When he turned back toward the entrance, he froze. Footprints. But not the man's. His own. Leading deeper into the cave. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling. The humming pressure behind Rio's ears returned, a low vibration running through the stone floor. He backed away, then scrambled up the incline and out into the open forest. The storm had worsened. Rain hammered the canopy and blurred the forest floor. Rio hurried toward the nearest ribbon marker, only to find the bark smooth. No tape. No trace he'd ever marked it. His breathing hitched. He checked another tree. Nothing. His entire path had been erased. He crouched, scanning the mud for his own footprints. They were still faintly visible, though water blurred them quickly. He followed them, then stopped. There were new prints mixed with his. Longer stride. Deeper impressions. Someone taller following his exact path. Lightning lit the forest in bluish flashes. Each time, Rio scanned behind him. Each time, nothing moved. But he kept hearing soft footfalls. And the whisper of fabric through branches. He pressed forward, every sense sharpened, until he spotted a familiar structure through the rain. A small wooden observation post from old forestry surveys. He climbed the ladder and collapsed inside, breathing hard. The post offered a few feet of elevation and a partial roof, just enough protection to think clearly. Rio pulled out the two journals. The older journal described a man slowly losing direction, hearing whisper-like drafts, and seeing footprints appear behind him. The last entry chilled him. It copies the ones who search. The newer journal, written by the missing office worker, documented rational attempts to escape, then degraded into spirals and frantic handwriting. One repeated line filled the final pages. It looks like me now. Rio's stomach twisted. Below the platform, mud shifted. Soft footsteps circled. He clicked off his flashlight and peered through the slats of the floor. In the dim rain, fresh footprints appeared one by one. But no legs made them. Just prints. Materializing in the mud. They stopped directly beneath him. A silhouette stood just beyond the platform, tall, unmoving. Watching. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating it for a split second. Ryo's breath caught. The face was his. Identical. Expressionless. Water dripping from its hair and jaw. It raised one hand, perfectly mirroring the way he gripped the railing. Then it tilted its head with unnatural precision, studying him as if memorizing every detail. A whisper drifted up, carried by the rain. "You came looking." Ryo backed away, slipping on the wet boards. His foot punched through a weak plank, and he fell from the platform, crashing into the mud below. Pain shot up his ribs. He rolled over, gasping, and the figure stepped toward him. Not attacking. Observing. Its movements were wrong. Mechanical. Mimicked. Every shallow breath Ryo took, it copied half a second later. It reached out a hand, his proportions, his trembling fingers. Its mouth moved. His own voice came out. "You searched for the truth." Ryo scrambled backward, slipping in the mud, but the thing stayed perfectly aligned with him. Every motion mirrored, every sound echoed. Lightning flashed again. It stood over him. Face empty. Eyes reflecting nothing. "Now I search for you," it whispered. Then the forest swallowed everything. Rain softened the ground. Wind erased the struggle. By sunrise, only footprints remained in the mud. But to anyone who found them, they looked exactly like Officer Ryo Nakamura's. If this investigation unsettled you, the Dread Diaries has far darker truths waiting. Subscribe before you wander too deep.